Welcome to the Sci-Fi, a podcast under the Believe Podcast Network about Black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in this marriage. Greetings, everyone. This will be episode 33 of the show. We are here to discuss the short story, The Space Traders by Derrick Bell. Before we get started today, I just want to let everybody know there will be spoilers for everything. So mute us and let us play for more listens. Come back later, reunite us. You know, if you ain't read it yet, read it first. It's a 13-page short story. Ben, before we jump in, how you doing today with your cute shell?
I'm feeling really overwhelmed.
By what?
Well, yesterday was May the 4th when we're recording this on Cinco de Mayo. And I have a full-time job and I can't catch up on all the new Star Wars content that's coming out. So,
well, speaking of Star Wars and aliens, we read a pretty disquieting story. Why don't you talk to us about why you chose this story, Ben?
It's hard to talk about this story without giving a summary of it. So I want to give the summary before the background. Okay, so the summary of the Space Traders is very, very simple. Aliens arrive to the U.S., and they offer resources to solve America's financial and ecological crises. And this is sort of a near-distant future. The short story was published in 1992, and the aliens arrive in 2000. However, there's a catch. In exchange for every resource that would solve all of America's problems, the aliens want to take back every Black person that's designated as Black on their birth certificate as a trade. And so the short story deals with the American government, contemplating the offer. So a little bit of background about this is that I had first read this story in the Dark Matter anthology, Sheree Renee Thomas's, seminal important work on Black science fiction, American Black science fiction. So that's how I first heard of it. Great story. But also Derrick Bell, the author of this, is a lawyer and civil rights activist. So he's not a science fiction writer. And there was a huge sort of we'll call it like the Derrick Bell gate, where Obama had given Derrick Bell a hug because apparently Obama and Derrick Bell were close. And Derrick Bell is one of the fathers of critical race theory. And
he's at Harvard, right? He's like a law professor.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. He passed away. I'm not exactly sure where he was based, but he's known for writing a book called Faces at the Bottom of the Well, which is really important text. And so, conservatives had saw this interaction and sort of connected the Space Traders as this commie, anti-American, awful piece of literature. And Obama's hugging of Derrick Bell was proof that Obama was a terrorist.
Co-signed terrorism.
Co-signed like a domestic terrorist / communist / anti-American.
Right.
So that's sort of why I wanted to read this book.
You're like, the hug heard round the world. What is the tea?
Okay, and then finally, the last thing is that I think this short story sort of represents a really classic science fiction story. I mean, it's dealing with a social theme, but a very awesome classic science fiction. And classic science fiction, an element of it is dealing with thought experiments, or the German word, which is Gedanken experiment, which is a phrase that Albert Einstein came up.
Gedanken. Are you sure it's pronounced like that?
Nope.
It's like Kardashian. I am a firm believer that Kardashian was a thought experiment.
Science fiction does speculating a what-if scenario really well, and classic science fiction writers are known for doing that. What if robots were used every single day? Isaac Asimov. What laws would you need to create to make that sustainable? Or, you wrote a story once of a very fantastical speculative element.
I did?
Yeah.
Remind me, because, I write something and then I throw it away.
Yeah, you did. I really liked this idea. And that's what science fiction does. You just take a singular idea. So you're not so much concerned with plot, or you're not so much concerned with characterization. You're concerned with the thought.
Yeah, it's like, what if Ben washed the dishes? What if Ben cleaned up after himself?
No. You have to sort of think of it in terms of something that hasn't happened or far future.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Wait, tell me what this story was that I wrote.
Oh, yeah. So your idea was, what if people, the way pregnancy worked is that people just woke up pregnant.
Oh.
You know, so pregnancy wasn't a result of sex. Like, sex was just pure pleasure, and the only way you got pregnant was sort of this random happenstance.
Yeah, like spontaneous pregnancy.
Right, spontaneous pregnancy, spontaneous combustion. Mary, virgin. So I actually I love that idea, is that all pregnancies are virgin pregnancies. Yeah. And what are the implications of that as far as gender politics and sexual politics? That is a perfect, like, what if, and you can throw in some science reason why that happens. That is a perfect science fiction idea. So you don't really have to, the characters and the plot can sort of write itself, but the thought itself is where the through line comes out. And science fiction does that really well, and that is what this short story is. It's, what if aliens came to the United States
and asked only for African Americans
to come back with them, and to trade them in exchange for resources. That's it. That's the main idea. So science fiction will often come up with these one-off stories, single sentence, you know, and that's
to address a greater concept or issue, or how society would respond is like holding a mirror up to society, which is why this story got so much, had people clutching their pearls, because it was so accurate.
Well, yeah, I think for people who are black, it's accurate.
As opposed to
a white person who benefits from.
You're like saying like the white conservatives who were upset about the story.
Yeah, I think they would, because a lot of the information was that America would never even consider trading African Americans in this present day in a post-racial 1992 society. 1990s, it's sort of the talk of entering in post-racial, a post-racial society. And there's a great article we'll put in here by one of the authors we interviewed on this podcast, Nisi Shaw. Mm-hmm. And they
Nisi!
Yeah, awesome. But they sort of share this little anecdote about how their mother explained to them that over the decades you discern like patterns and repeats. And Nisi Shaw, I think, is writing this in like 2016 or something, this essay about the space traders that was published in 92. And Nisi is like, in this is like, now I'm the age of which Derrick Bell was when he wrote this story. And this story now seems more relevant in the light of like Trump, in the light of people fighting the idea of taking down Confederate statues. And so that was just a very powerful essay that I wanted, to share. And I think what are your thoughts about that, of like
history repeating itself?
Well, not only that, but growing older and seeing that repeat.
Yeah. Well, I think, when you're a black person, when you inhabit a black body, like you're just constantly seeing, obviously I'm only 30 years old, but as I grow older and as I connect with my parents more daily, how you get to a point where you're like in your early 20s, you're like, I'll call my mama in 2 or 3 weeks. And now I talk to my mom almost every other day. I feel myself listening and trusting her more because of what you said, because we've seen these things time and time again. We've seen racism just on like 50 different plantations. Like, so
sorry, what do you mean that you've seen racism on 50 different plantations? What do you mean by that?
You've just seen all. I don't think there could be anything that could happen to a black person from the smallest infraction to the greatest that we have not yet seen. And if there was Little Marvin's them showed us that territory. That there is not an act of persecution against a black person that we have not seen. And
are you
they will
talking like
continue.
are you talking historically or in the arts or
Historically, in the arts as well? I think we've seen every single way that a group of people could be treated as less than and subordinate. So this story just reinforced that and held a mirror up to people, and I mean, I'm not shocked that people were mad, but it's just like, how could you possibly not think America would turn over its black citizens without batting an eye? Like, you want to believe you're better than them, but you're not. Y'all have done it. So it's sad. I liked this new spin on it because I definitely think it gave me some things to think about as well, just like some new ways it was introduced. But when you look at the bare bones of it, it was all the same.
So let's get into first impressions. What were your first impressions within the first page of the story?
I like what this story was doing because it built suspense, and it's like 13-page short story. Yeah, it sounds small, but it's sometimes you're like, okay, where's the story going? And I really liked the pacing of the story. For those of you who haven't read the story, it did a great. The aliens gave the Americans essentially 2 weeks to consider this deal, 17 days, a little over 2 weeks. So you got to sort of count through January 1st, January 3rd, that anxiety built as we entered January 11th, January 15th. And so that cadence and pacing worked really, really well for me. I thought it was super clever to include, which we'll talk about, the writing of policy as a result of this proposal and trade, because I think that is super American as well. It's like, oh, well, in the event that this happens again, let's let this live in posterity. Let's write it into law so that these people can't. Just weaponizing the law, I thought was just so clever, and was something, I guess, if I was writing this story, or even my speculative fiction piece about these spontaneous pregnancies, I probably wouldn't have thought to do that. Obviously, this person is like a fucking law professor at Harvard, but I thought that was so smart. What did you think about it? Off rip.
Well, there's a character that's introduced, Golightly, who's a Republican black senator who sort of sits in the presidency's cabinet, which is all white people. The president is a Republican and has, sort of dominated the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is the ruling party in this United States. And
Reagan-esque.
Yeah, Reagan-esque, right? And so my first impressions about this is I kept on just thinking about black Republicans and how even today Golightly is very much alive and well, and sort of his thinking is quite interesting. Like his reasoning of why he's a black Republican, which is eventually we find out he's a black Republican so that he could understand white people and go about supporting black people in a different way. Like he supports
in an infiltrating kind of way.
Yeah, he supports HBCUs. Like he provides a lot of secret funding, and he's constantly referred to as an Uncle Tom, and which made me think about Tim Scott, who in the time of us recording this, Tim Scott wrote, did a speech sort of counteracting Biden's speech. And he says a statement, America is not racist. This is Tim Scott, the actual Republican senator. And then everybody started calling him Uncle Tim. And I think
they call him Uncle Tom, or
Uncle Tim.
You put the words. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Got it.
So that was trending. And I read Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in middle school. It's a really, really big book. And what I remember about that is that Uncle Tom is sort of like a tragic figure. Like he isn't villainous. He sort of does what he has to do on this plantation to get by. And so I sort of
like Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, sure. Well, Well, I never got the impression that if I remember, this is in middle school, that he loved his masters,
Yeah.
And I think when people, first of all, calling him Uncle Tim, I think it's meant to be as a sellout, but when you sort of look at the history of what the word Uncle Tom or the character of Uncle Tom is, that he wasn't a sellout. He was a slave who had to do things to get by.
But
right?
wasn't he I didn't read it, and you got to also consider your middle school brain on it. But it was my understanding that Uncle Tom was freed and decided to stay for a myriad of reasons. Maybe he's like, well, where would I go? I've never lived anywhere else, or I have a lack of resources. But it was, through the grapevine that Uncle Tom was a slave that was freed and decided to stay. And I think it got lost in the sauce that he stayed because he loved his master so much.
No, it's like a 400-page book. And
so was he ever freed in the story?
I actually don't remember.
I think that was what it was, though, Ben.
Yeah, I think that might be it at the end. I know it follows his through line as a young person all the way till he's old and he can't actually move. I think there's sort of a ableism, a form of ability politics going on in this story as well. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, she's a white woman who writes this, and it sort of helped the abolitionist movement. When Lincoln meets Harriet Beecher Stowe, he says, here's the little woman who started the war or whatever. Do you remember that story?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so basically it sort of incited, good white liberals to...
Right. Or this idea that, it's hard because I think that book is important. I think I need to go back and read that book, but it's hard because...
No, you don't. It's so long.
It's so long. Well, I can audiobook it or whatever the fuck. I'm just saying I do want to know what I'm saying if I am calling people Uncle Tom and things like that. But I think it does two things. It shows Black people as sort of the original sunken place a little bit, or
that's a great analogy.
It's the OG sunken place, because it's who knows what I would have done if I had lived my whole life on a plantation and then was freed. It's I literally have never lived anywhere else. And then two, what it does, it says to white people, see, they like being near us. So it's a dangerous book, because there are so many, even on TikTok, there are so many videos of people who are wearing Confederate flags, repping the Confederate South, being lots of those slaves stayed after they were freed. They loved it. These were more just co-workers. And it just creates this false idea and theory about what slavery was. And so I think when I see modern day Uncle Toms, I'm less angry and more my heart goes out to you, because you are never you have not even the slightest idea of how assimilated you are. You will never have access to your freedom and your power. It's like a freaking whale who you see that curved fin on the top. You've been in captivity your whole life, and then they try to free willy you out to the sea. You're I've never been here before. Which sucks, because we're not, it's not the freaking antebellum South. Tim Scott's black ass could easily go read Roots and rediscover, but he is surrounded by people that have told him just proximity to whiteness. You got this. You're successful. You're confident. You're strong.
Well, I think that's the Derrick Bell's point, is that we are still in an antebellum South of a sort.
Yeah, different plantations, I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to say earlier, but I don't think it came out like that.
Okay, so... Yeah, and I think comparing, for Derrick Bell, this story is comparing the plight of African-American slavery to the current plight that's happening now in the 2000s in this story. So let's sort of get into the themes here. One of the themes that I think he addresses really well is a quote he writes, an unwritten tradition of sacrificing Black rights, that America has a tradition of sacrificing Black rights.
I would argue that it's not unwritten.
Yeah, and then also that's the second part, is that he sort of gets into Well, I think it's unwritten in some sense. So it's unwritten because, like you said, there are people on TikTok who have a false understanding of what slavery was, or they have a misguided understanding of what slavery was. And why is that the case? That is the case because the tradition of this is unwritten. It's not in history books. It's not taught, right? America hasn't, this is a huge thing in public education, is that we don't have a clear social studies narrative. We don't have a clear narrative of
everything is
slavery.
Us versus them.
We don't, there's so much debate about, in the state's legislation about what slaves were. Were they workers, unpaid workers, or were they slaves that were raped and brutalized, blah, blah, the whole
part.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
That part. And because we don't want to accept what actually happened, because we haven't written it down, that we haven't made a clear narrative about this, people are very confused. Yeah. And I think that's what he's getting at.
Got you. I see. I just that was really, I don't know. It really, I needed to read the story, and it's powerful, but I feel stupid for not being desensitized to this shit at this point in my life, because there was a time, when the aliens first hit the waters, right? And they came and they were grand and everybody admired them. And they were like, we would like the African Americans. I, too, foolishly, for that first part, I was like, oh, man, maybe these aliens are saying, like, y'all have oppressed the shit out of these people. We are taking them. We are saving them, whatever. And then when it said, like, I think on page 2 of the story, it said that while the white people in their eyes saw the aliens as, like, grandiose and sort of good-natured, the black people watching it saw the evil right away. So that was my turning point. I was like, whatever the black people saw in this scenario is how it goes down. So I had a moment where I was like, there's no fucking way that they would just give up every black person in their country. Like consider how many things would crumble if that happened. And then I can't believe, I felt stupid even for a split second, thinking that like even as I read the story, I was like, maybe. And I was like, of course they're not going to fucking do that. Like, they've kind of been looking for this solution. So, like, here it is on a platter. So I went from, like, obviously they're going to give away these black citizens. And then I kept being angry with myself for being shocked as the stakes raised. Like, when legislation was written, I was like, of course that fucking happened. Like it was shocking to see how things escalated so quickly, but I felt just like really dumb for being shocked in 2021 about the things that were happening.
Yeah, there's a whole line in there. They quote Langston Hughes, who says, white people take our blues and run. I think that was the quote. And this whole idea that I think white people don't really credit, what do I mean by white? What kind of? I think white legislatures don't credit black folk for creating culture and creating America. And there's this.
Say it again, because I don't think they heard you, Ben.
Yeah, white legislator. I would say the Republican Party, vast amounts of the Democratic Party.
And several white liberals, as this story pointed out.
Yes, a certain kind of white liberals that I think they would, I think to an extent, but to say something along the line of that America would not exist without slavery, which is what this story does say, I think would make a lot of people angry, a lot of people angry, because I think we sort of pride ourselves as saying, no, America was founded by founding fathers who took Greek and Roman ideas of government and applied it to a new world. And what this story is saying, no, they took slaves and built a social structure that allowed support of a building of a country. And they killed everybody who was here, or pushed them out into isolated areas, and then they took slaves, black folk, and built America. That is the founding. It wasn't a political, social idea, social experiment. And a lot of people, I think, get really angry about that idea.
And we, inversely, I am so fascinated with this idea of like American exceptionalism. It's so, because when you talk to somebody like we'll move on to this theme of sort of extreme patriotism, right? Like when you don't want to do something as a black citizen, because I would be involved in this space trade, and white people looking at you, yeah, but it's your American duty. This is the greatest country ever. This is the most, in America, you can be somebody, you can whatever. It's like, America's did literally the same shit every other country did, except them motherfuckers got free healthcare. Like, I don't understand, or in the past when you've said some statements and then family members of yours have said like, well, why don't you just move somewhere else? It's like, what? Why is America off the table for debate? Like, people
What do you
love
mean by that?
America. Like, I recognize that I do have a lot of rights and privileges as an American, especially when we travel, because everybody speaks English because our fucking asses aren't required to learn a second language or whatever the fuck.
I mean, that's also like UK colonialism as well.
Right.
It's not really, I mean, American colonialism, but also UK colonialism. The British Empire sort of helped us on that.
It's just so bizarre when other...
Helped, I say, quote, unquote.
Yeah. It's just so bizarre to me when you meet like Americans who are like, but that happened to you in America? Or I'll never forget, we were watching like this expose on Reese Witherspoon, which we stand Reese Witherspoon, but one time she got like super drunk and got arrested, and there's footage of her saying to the cop like, you can't arrest me, I'm American, I'm an American. It's just like, what? So you think you're above the fucking law? Well, yeah, you probably kind of are. You kind of can in America duck and dodge if you are a white person. And so we're just getting further and further polarized. But I was shocked that I thought, no, there's no way Americans are going to write this legislation that allows black people to be taken yet again. It's like, of course they did. Or you know what? Can I say something real quick? It's the kind to when the pandemic first hit and the buzzword was, this is unprecedented. This is an unprecedented situation that has happened to us. This is exceptional. This is unprecedented.
Which, in the time this was being written, 1992, what was going on, right? The AIDS.
Yes. Sorry. I was referring to, in my mind, I was thinking the Spanish flu. So I was like, why did he say 1950? But it's that, right? It's we keep coming to a head with these issues, and we have these traditions of being like, well, this has never happened before. It's like, the other countries deal with this every fucking year. Like, why are we acting like babies? Why can't we just put masks on? I don't understand how, even in this, like, a law can be written so quickly to take black people out of their homes, but legislation can't be written to protect. I don't know.
We'll move on to the theme of legislation in a second. I do want to talk about patriotism, though, because I struggle with this idea of patriotism. I think it is incredibly harmful for the human as a race, because patriotism ultimately sacrifices the needs of others for the need of a non-living entity, a country, right? A country is a non-living entity. And I've recently read Catch-22, which is hilarious. And the whole point of Catch-22, which this story ends with a Catch-22, the whole point of Catch-22 is this soldier who's forced to go on these missions like again and again and again. And he's just so confused, like, why am I killing people? I mean, this is World War II, right? If anybody says if there was a just war, it would be World War II, which itself is problematic, because why did we get World War II? It was America's, brutalization of Germany after World War I, and unchecked anti-Semitism, a tradition of unchecked anti-Semitism in Germany, right? That happened for years and years and years, which this story mentions as well. Point being is that it's very that story, Catch-22, is hilarious. It's such an attack on patriotism, and I think there's this element of healthy patriotism, of like pride, like being
like that's at the World Cup.
Yeah,
and then everything else is just fucking dangerous.
Well, also that, but also like, being proud of the kind of music that was grown on your land, or the kind of food that comes from your. There's healthy forms of. There's healthy forms of. Yeah, there's an American uniqueness to a hamburger. Anyway, the point is that there's healthy patriotism and there's unhealthy patriotism, and I don't think we are taught the difference as Americans. I don't think, CNN teaches us the difference between healthy patriotism and unhealthy patriotism. I don't think Fox News teaches us that. I don't think lots of different media outlets, maybe NPR, but I think there's a confusion about that. So anyway, I think this book does a good dose of showing like what unhealthy patriotism looks like. All right, let's talk about legislation because, as you said, this book, this short story ends with legislation.
It is written in this book. It's like the Selective Service Act of something.
Yeah, they call it selective service. And what they do is they use the 1918 Act, historical act of the draft. So they take this idea of the draft and apply it to all black people to be forced to be traded to the aliens. But one thing I love about this is when someone who is not a traditional science fiction writer or part of the science fiction community writes a science fiction story, they can tend to bring like a new lens to it, because Derrick Bell is a legislator. He's a lawyer. I don't think he was a legislator. He was a lawyer and had studied law. He brings up all these different laws. So a couple of the things he brings up is he talks a little bit about the prison industrial complex, and only recently states had started getting rid of check the box. Remember check the box movement? So basically, for ex-convicts who were trying to get jobs, whenever you filled out a job application, they would say, "Have you been convicted of a crime?" And you had to check a box. And what was happening when you checked that box?
Yeah, like if you had
you were denied. Or they just would never look at that. And that idea was just so like, how can a prisoner, an ex-convict, be reintegrated? It's impossible, right? Yeah. And there was recently we watched a documentary called Wild Wild Country, and there's an actual person who went to prison, served their time, but after that they moved out of the U.S. And their point is, in the U.S., one of the few countries that forces you to continue to pay for your crime even after you've paid the original time. Yeah. Like there's still this leftover. And then he also brings up the court's decision to confine Japanese Americans in World War II. So there's all this precedent
or like these,
for
these
doing
roundups.
This. There's historical precedent for doing what they do in this case.
I mean, I'm sure Derrick Bell had a field day when people were like, how could you write something like this? This would never happen. It's like I'm literally referencing like history. You have legislation and history. And we have a history of rounding up and trying to get rid of people, like globally, that do not look like us, that worship a different God than us. And rules can be arbitrarily written to do so. If I remember as a little kid when I first learned about slavery, which was devastating. Every black child has a story where they first learned about slavery and racism, and it was the worst week of our lives, maybe around anywhere from first grade to fifth grade. Big gap, depends on what state you were in and what education level. But we all had that day where we learned Harriet Tubman was not just a supervisor and the hardest worker on the motherfucking yard. She was a slave who helped. Everybody knows that story. So, and I remember when I recognized what that was, I went home to my mom after a couple of days of it setting in, and I just sobbed in her arms, and I said, like, this is going to happen again. And she was like, no, this can never happen again. This can never happen again. She, obviously she's trying to console me. And I was like, what stops it from happening again? She was like, well, there are laws written where people can't enslave other people. I was like, so a law can be written to unwrite that, right?
You said that as a child?
Oh, yeah. I was like, well, who wrote that? Like, anybody could write that. Anybody can write and unwrite a law. Or like, isn't Georgia... right now, because I'm from Georgia originally, I know that I say that every time. Let's talk about extreme patriotism, extreme stateism, whatever the fuck. I rep Georgia all day.
Well, also, hold on. You've shared that story that you just shared, but you sort of shared a little bit more as well.
Right.
Which I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, I've shared the funny part where I was like excited to be a slave.
Yeah.
Because of the foolish way it was described. And then my mom was like, girl, what did your teacher say? I was like, yeah, mom, like the teacher said, like this group of workers built America. And like all of those workers looked just like me, whatever. And she was like, what the fuck? And then she explained to me what it was. And I was like, she was, I got to see pictures of black people with like whippings on their back. And I was like, this is devastating. And I was like, how is this not going to happen again? Like, what stops this from happening again? And my point of bringing up Georgia a minute ago was saying like voting on this like Voting Rights Act and stuff. Like these acts and these laws sometimes have like an expiration date. And when it's time to renew, they can be written and unwritten. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, well, once it's law, it's written, and then it would have to be unwritten. So this law, I think what you're bringing up with the Georgia,
at the blank page before. That's
yeah.
what I've been thinking about every time we say unwritten.
Yeah. But I think that's a perfect example. This Georgia law, which, okay, so like the optics of it seems as if it's attacking like civil rights, and people are saying it's civil rights. I went through and like read the law, and they're just doing like inconvenient things, but also they're also extending certain laws. And actually, New York's voting laws are significantly worse. I'll put an article in there, but because New York is a Democratic state and Georgia has a history of doing this, because they did some like really awful, like just stupid stuff, like you can't hand out water to people in line is like the big one that people are upset about, but also, getting rid of drop boxes, certain places where you can drop off. Making it more, it's more inconvenient. Basically, they're solving a problem that didn't need to be solved, but actually adding certain things that will actually make it easier for voting as well. So there's this whole, but the point being is that people can write laws. States can write laws that can be very harmful and dangerous. Whether this specific instance is going to like destroy voting or whatever, probably not. But what it does show is that someone could do that. That could happen. Also, to round up, the other thing we didn't say is, June is coming up. Stonewall riots.
Oh, I thought you were
Stonewall.
Like it was just Juneteenth with that. But yes.
Yeah, it was just a normal thing to go to Stonewall, every so often, round up the people in the bar.
Yeah, all of the gay queer people, and just put them in the paddy wagon for what? For
like, a day or so. And then they'd come back a month later, and they're like, no more. Like, no, like this, we're organizing on this day. When they come, we're not doing it. So.
Or going back to your point about legislation, there was a good part of the story where people publicly would seem like they were in opposition. Because I want to be clear, going back to the space traders, these aliens were trying to trade like the very specific things like gold and chemicals that could clear up all of the air pollutants in America. Like these aliens were like, here are the receipts, here's samples of each of the products we're offering in return for these African Americans. Like your economy will do better and you will live longer if you give us your black citizens, whatever. So I'm not justifying that, obviously, but what I was trying to say is there was one part in the short story where it said people would publicly be against it, but in the privacy of their own polling place, they are going to vote in their interests, which we saw that. And this was, Derrick Bell wrote this story way before the era of Trumpism, we saw that shit because everybody woke up the morning that Trump was elected shocked and appalled. And we learned, oh, like no matter how much people act like they would never do this in the privacy of their own polling place, their biases and their interests are where they're going to vote, no matter what they said to your face. So it was just, before we start to tail off, the other thing I wanted to point out is the character Gleason Golightly, who was sort of the Uncle Tom character. At one part of the story, he proposed something that I thought was a little bit clever, but at that point nobody gave a fuck about him because he was a complete sellout. But he proposed to the black people, how about we act like we all want to go? How about we put on like this is the land of milk and honey? And I really thought a lot about the Joel Chandler Harris Brer Rabbit story, right? Because that was Brer Rabbit's. We talked about that with P. Jelly Clark. If you haven't heard the P. Jelly Clark interview, go back and listen to it. But if you're familiar with like the Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear tales, there's Brer Rabbit, and he's like this little cartoon rabbit, and he is being chased or attacked by Brer Fox, and Brer Fox catches him, and Brer Fox tries to think of like, well, I've got you now. What am I going to do with you? It's like Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner. And Brer Rabbit, it was like, whatever you do, you can burn me alive. You can roll me up in tar, but please, 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 please don't throw me in the briar patch. Please don't throw me in the briar patch. So obviously Brer Fox is like, oh, I'm going to throw him in the briar patch. That's the thing he doesn't want. And he doesn't know Brer Rabbit lives in the briar patch. So I immediately thought about that story when Gleason Golightly was like, why don't we all just pretend like we want to go to trick these white people? Because I've been in the mind of these white people for so long. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. Because I remember thinking like, that's actually genius. Like, because white people, sort of can be, like it's like when we all hop on a trend, white people hop on the trend. So I was like, that's actually a super, super clever. And I'm wondering what would have happened if all the black people bought into that. But they're like, we're not gambling with our motherfucking life. Like, what if they still decide to send us? But I think Gleason Golightly was like, they're going to send our black asses anyway. Why don't we sort of put a trick on them? But at that point, he had lost credibility. What did you think about that part of the story?
All right, so there's all these scandals now of white creators stealing from black creators because right, and I think they're sort of playing with that idea a little bit, like but it seems it's happening. I think it's a little bit more clearer now because we're able to because everything is sort of being recorded
and
called out, yeah. So I'm thinking of the TikTok dancer who showed up on Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah.
What else? I think even now with like voguing,
right,
and all that, with voguing, we're seeing when
with
voguing
the popularity of ballroom, it's like
with ballroom and voguing becoming more mainstream. I think that like pretty soon it's going to be like that idea is going to be stolen either by like cis folk, like cis and straight folk.
That happened first.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not trying to say
Madonna.
Madonna
right.
did give credit to, like, I think Madonna actually hired voguers. Like, she was like, what y'all are doing here is interesting. I'd like this to be a part of my backdrop. So she popularized it, but then that also permutates into, oh, Madonna invented voguing, which, everybody knows that ain't the tea.
Or it made me think of that interview with Lizzo where they mentioned Miley Cyrus twerking and like Miley Cyrus bringing twerking, and Lizzo's like, "Oh no, we've been twerking since the campfire during the Stone Age. We've been twerking this whole time." She handled the misinformation really well by like making a joke about it. But again, like that's sort of he's playing with that. Is if we show something that black people really love and really enjoy, they'll try to steal it from us in the same way. They'll want to go.
They'll ask, why weren't we chosen?
Right, and that's sort of brilliant. I think it's also so Golightly is really the only.
What a fun name!
Yeah, it was really the only character in this story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few others, but he's the primary character, and it sort of implied that he understands the inner working of white folk, and he better than everybody else.
Prides himself on that too.
He does. He's an interesting character because, I think he's written to actually be a sympathetic character, and because he is using his Republican status to bring more support to Black folk. And I think that a take on it was actually quite intriguing. Let's just go ahead and end with some sighs. Let's go into some sighs. So the only sigh I have about this is that I watched like a 33-minute video of like a 1990 HBO rendition of this called Cosmic Slop. So Cosmic Slop took 3 short films, combined them together. It was produced by HBO. And it was pretty interesting. Like, for example, one part of it is that they address what about like mixed couples? What about interracial couples? What about mixed children?
In the story.
Yeah, a little bit. And then
so we out if this happens today, me and our future child, because they were probably African American on our child's birth certificate.
Right. The only thing, did they talk about mixed couples?
At one point, they were saying there was a group of people in the story that were trying to make a plea to white people not to do this, and one part of that was the interracial couples were like, please don't take my family away from me. If you do that, this deal will do that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, no. So anyway, Cosmic
and your ass better have been on that TV crying for me too.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously.
So, obviously?
Well, I think I would probably become a terrorist.
If they took me?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, baby.
I would absolutely become a terrorist.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You better ride for
a
me.
quote unquote terrorist. I mean, you'd use some sort of violent action, right?
Yeah.
Like that. So that's really the only
of terrorism. Yeah.
Well, so I think I'm saying that now, obviously, but he is writing this with sort of an understanding of through the lens of the Holocaust. And at one point, he compares the Holocaust to what's happening now.
Yep.
And a lot of people,
And he includes in the story the Jewish people that tried to help out in this situation because they're like, we've seen this before. This is not okay.
Right. And so I think what Nazi Germany did is that they did this like almost a slow gradual. It was a gradual progression. Like it wasn't like, okay, here's the final solution in 2 weeks, right? Like it was more of a progression. So I think my only side is I think there would have been an element of violent backlash, where he is actually saying, no, people would just be so surprised by it. Like, of course, this would never, ever happen. Right. And then privately, people would be very excited.
Well, people did try to flee the country and everything, but I hear you. 2 weeks is a short turnaround time.
Yeah, which I think if it's that short, I think you would get some sort of violent element, which doesn't happen in the story. Right. But I mean, that would be my only sigh. I wish Cosmic Slop was better. It was narrated by George Clinton. It doesn't
get any better than that.
Yeah. I mean, go check it out. It's on YouTube. It's free. It's really shady, like video quality. But if you want something else after this.
Not you calling it shady. My only side for this would be, so I mentioned earlier that there was pacing of like, they had this window from January 1st to January 17th, so they would give us the day by day. But there were a couple of days that were missing. Like January 12th just wasn't there. There was like 1 or 2 other days where I was like, I would have liked... as my heart rate went, I got, when I saw that one date got skipped, I got worried that other dates would be skipped. But I'm splitting hairs at this point. It's a really great story. We would love to hear what y'all have to say about it.
I do want to go back to one last thing. So I think like for me, I would say, or like I think other people might read this and be like, oh, we would like there would be a violent uprising, and I think that. Saying that could be problematic, right?
Yeah, it's like the people who are like, "Why did the slaves revolt?" Some did, bitch.
Some did. Also, some did.
Did.
And I think, yeah. I mean, I would hope I would.
I feel what you're saying, and I'm glad you made that point. And with that being said, Ben, why don't you warp up the show?
In conclusion, read this short story. Takes 30 minutes. Go by Dark Matter, where this short story is also collected. And read more Derrick Bell.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Side. Next week for episode 34, we're going back in our anime bag, y'all. LaShawn Thomas has brought us Yasuke on Netflix, but we're going to be breaking this up into 2 separate episodes. So we're going to binge episode 1 through 3 and then episode 4 through 6. So if you would like to check it out, please watch episodes 1 through 3 of Yasuke. And this next time around, the episode will be dropping on Tuesday. We're switching up our dates a little bit, so look out for that episode on Tuesday, and we will see y'all next time for the show. Bye, y'all.